Scott, we talked a little bit earlier today about Texas. The governor there saying they're going to open up businesses at 100% and they're going to get rid of the mask mandates. Is that a problem in your perspective?
Look, I think we need to be careful how we start to relax provisions, and we're certainly going to be relaxing provisions over the course of this month. March really is a difficult month. It sits between two worlds. February was a raging epidemic. It was very clear that we needed to have measures in place. I think April is going to be profoundly better, and March is sitting in the middle. The situation's improving. It's going to start to hopefully accelerate. But we still face a lot of risk of a resurgence this month, and we're still grappling with variants that we don't fully understand. We're trying to get the population vaccinated more aggressively. I think, we need to be careful how we take the foot off the brake. Now, that said, we also need to give the public realistic goals when we are going to be relaxing these provisions and set up some kind of a timeline. A lot of public health officials were critical of what the UK did, where they set up specific dates as targets for when they're going to lift certain provisions and have a more open population, more open environment. But I think you need to give realistic targets. CDC is going to come out with guidance this week that's going to prescribe what people can start to do, particularly after they're vaccinated. I think it's going to be overly prescriptive and conservative, and that's the wrong message, because if we continue to be very prescriptive and not give people a realistic vision for what a better future is going to look like, they're going to start to ignore the public health guidance. And for the most part, over the last 12 months, the American population has put up with a lot. They've complied with a lot of the provisions that have been put in place, and we're safer for that. And we're going to lose that support if we don't give a realistic glide path to a better future. Now, March is a little bit premature, I think, to lift everything, but certainly getting on a glide path towards lifting a lot of these provisions right now makes sense.
It's interesting that you talk about the CDC provisions that I think we're expecting on Thursday. Anthony Fauci was talking about them yesterday and basically said, look, if you have a group of adults, maybe a small group of adults, your grown children who come home, you've been vaccinated, they've been double vaccinated, then it's okay to have masks off in a small environment at home. And I thought exactly what you just said. That seems incredibly conservative. I feel like people get the vaccine, they feel like they can get out there. And maybe it's not life back as normal as it was before, but the idea that you can only have fully vaccinated people around you at that point, especially when kids aren't going to be vaccinated, and that's the only way you can take your mask off in that environment, that seems incredibly conservative and something that I think a lot of people would push back at.
Well, look, I think the bottom line is people aren't going to follow it. And it doesn't really make sense to put out public health guidance that people are going to ignore, because you lose your credibility and you lose your ability to speak to the public. So the bottom line is, people who are fully vaccinated have waited a period after vaccination. They're going to want to see their families again, even if their families aren't fully vaccinated. I think in a high prevalence environment, you should still be careful. Don't do it if you're not feeling well. Maybe get tested beforehand. I think why not wear a mask in public, even if you've been vaccinated in a very high prevalent environment? But, older people who've been vaccinated, they're going to want to see their kids again. They're going to want to see their grandkids. We need to prescribe public health recommendations on how you can do that safely, not say you can't do that, because people are going to do it. So, the most prudent thing to do from a public health standpoint, my view, is try to prescribe guidance that gives people safe ways to do what they're going to engage in. And we know that people who are fully vaccinated are going to want to see their families.
We've seen the case numbers nationwide come down astronomically. What's high prevalence? How do you determine if you're in a high prevalence area or not?
Yeah, I think we need to start shifting that debate as well. I mean, high prevalence, we're still at 20,000 infections a day. That's still pretty high prevalence. But 20,000 infections a day now is different than what 20,000 infections a day looked like last spring or last summer. Because last spring or last summer, the entire population largely was vulnerable to this virus. Right now, the vulnerability of the population is being sharply reduced. I mean, assuming something unexpected doesn't happen with these new variants, particularly the South African and the Brazilian variant, we're dramatically reducing the proportion of the population that's vulnerable to this virus, either through prior infection, so people have some natural immunity, or more likely vaccination, where we're vaccinating fully more than 50% of those over the age of 65, more than 60% those over the age of 70. So as the vulnerability of the population overall comes down, I think we can put up with a little bit of a higher prevalence if the case mix is much different, if the cases are in people who are far less vulnerable to the virus. So we need to also look at the percentage of the population that's vulnerable as we look at prevalence. And we can't just say, well, 20,000 infections or 10,000 infections today is what 10,000 infections were a year ago. It's not the same anymore, because the population as a whole is gaining more protection from the virus.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.